Does anyone have any questions so far? Oh, I do see a hand in the back.
So you said that one of the symptoms of a concussion was like rapid eye movement, right? Like people during sleep already experience rapid eye movement, like during dreams. So like, what's the difference?
Yeah. So in terms of diagnosing a concussion and rapid eye movement, that is something called nystagmus, and that will be apparent if you have something dysfunctional in your vestibular system. And typically that is only there when you have something called BPPV, which is benign proximal positional vertigo, which I'm going to try to keep it simple. In your inner ear, you got these like little canals, they go in different directions, and they help tell you where you are in space. There are crystals in them, right? If those crystals get into that liquid, your brain is going to think that you are moving when you're not. So your eyes will start to do a little bit of like a flutter sensation called nystagmus and move, like you're saying. So that is what's differentiates that eye movement versus your typical everyday REM sleep, which is what most people experience when they are sleeping.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also if I don't answer a question clearly and you want more emphasis on it, feel free to ask the question right after.
I know you said there was a lot of activities that were hard for you. Did you find comfort in any certain activities during your early recovery?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So imagine if you were really sick, right? When you're really sick, you don't feel up to really doing anything, right? So for the most part, those first few years, I didn't feel good, But in the times where I felt up to a little bit of something, I would try to journal a little bit on my phone. I also tried listening to audiobooks. And in the beginning, it actually took a while for me to start listening to audiobooks because it just felt too much processing for my brain to handle. So I started listening to audiobooks, and now that is something that is very restful to me. As the years went on and I began to become a little less symptomatic in terms of just existing, I learned a lot of things, and sometimes I just did this thing once. So for example, I painted once, and I wood burned another time. I used to have rats, which they're the best, I love rats, but I learned how to sew, and I would sew them like a hammock or a little pad they can lay on. And then now I've sewed a jacket before. I've learned how to knit more recently, and I also learned how to play piano, and I would play my guitar a little bit more. That was definitely more of an earlier on thing that I could do. The knitting and sewing, that came more in the last 3 years. But when I tried to play my guitar early on, I again was very sensitive to the sound, so I put earplugs in as I played, and it's an acoustic guitar, it's not that loud. But that is something I found joy in, as well as trying to listen to a little bit of music. And also, I think I liked to dream. So I was in my head a lot. I would write things in my head. I would just envision a future in my head. I would plan these things of when I'm better. So I'd come up with all these ideas. So I definitely found ways to keep myself occupied and not bored. Even though, like I said, when you're sick, you're not bored because you just don't feel good,
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You said that your symptoms, I have 2 questions, but you said that your symptoms have been getting better. Do you think that they will ever be completely resolved? And have you ever considered joining the medical field because of all the knowledge you've acquired from this experience?
Mm-hmm. So, do I ever think my symptoms will be fully resolved? I've teetered on both ends of the spectrum to this question. There was a point where I thought, I'm going to live like this forever. That's it, And then there was a point where I was like, I'm going to be 100% better. All my symptoms need to disappear before I can go to college, before I can achieve anything. I need to be 100% better. And now I find myself, I think, a little bit more in reality where I recognize that something like migraine disease is something I always had headaches as a kid, and I never really realized what they were until I got this is my second concussion. When I got my first concussion, my headaches got worse, and then after this concussion, my headache has been more constant, and then the migraine attacks have been way more severe and way more frequent. So I think recognizing that migraine disease is something I will live with for the rest of my life, but that doesn't keep me from believing, or at least trying to decrease the frequency and the severity of those specific migraine symptoms. When it comes to like the dysautonomia I experience, like the blood pressure, blood pooling, I'm not sure if that will ever go away. I think it will definitely keep improving as I continue to improve. So as I continue to gain more tolerance, just like being upright, and as I, try to get more into strength training and building muscle that will help with like the blood circulation coming up, I think it will definitely improve. And then the vision-wise, continuing in therapy, vision therapy will hopefully bring a lot of my visual dysfunctions and sensitivities to a more minimal level, where things like casually reading a book or watching a movie or things like that become easier. And in long-term symptoms totally disappearing, I think I talked to actually my vestibular therapist about this like 2 weeks ago. And we kind of realized that like there's always going to be a little bit of maintenance that I'm going to have to do going forward, and maybe for the rest of my life. So at the point when I'm able to like graduate vestibular therapy, or even at some point vision therapy, that doesn't mean I can just like no longer do any of my rehab exercises, like the head turns or the reading, because there will be a level of like maintenance that my brain and inner ear and eyes are going to need to maintain that level of symptom tolerance. But hopefully at some point I gain more tolerance in terms that like things I'm doing in life will somewhat substitute for like what I have to do in rehab. And in terms of the medical field, being interested in that, yes, I am very interested in that. I'm not quite sure what it will look like. I would love to work with like chronic illness and migraine disease and concussion, brain injury, things like that. Whether it is as a physical therapist or a psychologist of some sort, I think I'm very much interested in that. And to start that process, I'm actually going to try to go for like yoga teacher training and be an accessible yoga teacher for those, again, have chronic illness and who can't just like go to a class, So that is where I'm trying to start and like intertwine those interests of both the psychological and the physical of everything I've experienced so far.
When you go out, I'm over here.
Oh, okay.
When you like go out and do things, do you like wear something to inform people of your disability? Like I think it's the sunflower that people wear.
I have heard of the sunflower. I haven't done that in terms of going locally. I do have like a handicap tag with me, so in case there's not parking like super close, I can use that. But I don't have anything specifically for going out in public like that. I know I've talked about it with my mom, and my mom's like says like I should get like a little bracelet or something like that. But in terms of traveling in the future, when I find myself able to have enough tolerance to fly somewhere, that's definitely going to be something I think I'm going to look into. And what they said is there's something called the sunflower lanyard, and it is a bit of a universal thing. I think a lot of it's more known like in the European countries, but it just shows that you have like an invisible illness, disease, or just something, so that staff at airports or places are just more cognizant of you and your abilities are like and are more supportive. So at some point when I do travel, that'll be something I'll wear, and I'll also contact like the airport and places just to get accommodations in place as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before you were talking about how certain things like going into a store or other stuff triggered symptoms, and I just thought that was kind of similar to PTSD. Like, how is PTSD like different? Can PCS include PTSD? Could they be misdiagnosed for each other? Like, how are they related?
So PTSD can also go hand in hand with concussion, depending on what situation happened with your brain injury. So a lot of times PTSD comes from the psychological effects of something that you experienced. So walking into a store, if someone has had a traumatic experience, and when we say trauma, I think a lot of times you can think something that's like super traumatic, that's so rare, but trauma for people look very different in each person. So trauma to one person can be different from trauma from a different person. And walking into a store can be something that is traumatic for someone, and they can start to experience symptoms associated with PTSD, which of course is different from everyone, but they could feel anxious, maybe their vision will start to tunnel if they have those sort of symptoms. When it comes to post-concussion syndrome or persistent post-concussive symptoms, those symptoms, there is a psychological factor in it, because as I said before, your brain can start to perceive danger because it's just trying to keep you safe, right? But the symptoms of not being able to perceive depth, so let's say aisles, that is really symptom provoking in terms of like dizziness. Your eyes don't know where to focus, if there's busy flooring, the lights, the sound is really overstimulated when it comes to someone who has those PCS symptoms, or like being upright. If you have trouble being upright and you're feeling dizzy from that, that is a lot of times on the PCS side, but of course it depends on how you got your concussion, and if you also do have, let's say, anxiety is a symptom of your concussion, because anxiety is a symptom as well with PTSD. It just depends on the crossovers, but there's definitely some crossovers.
Hi, so I know you said that you had a previous concussion before you got the second one. What was the severity of that one before?
Yeah, so that one, I was going into 8th grade, I believe, and that one was pretty severe. So this was maybe 2012, 2011, right? This was before people realized that there is like rehab and certain things to treat concussion. So when I got that concussion, I was actually playing manhunt with my neighbors, and I had dove to get my neighbor. He moved out of the way. My other neighbor tried to get him at the same time, and we kind of collided. My head hit her leg, and it actually had broken her leg in 2 places. So it was a pretty severe concussion. I laid on the floor. I couldn't get up for like 3 hours afterwards, but I didn't get any specific treatment for it. I think I might have went to an urgent care and they gave me an ice pop and said, okay, like, you have a concussion. I was like, okay. I didn't feel good. And it was right before school starting, so I couldn't miss out the first few weeks of school. So I ended up going into school, and my mom had reached out to all my teachers and letting them know, like, hey, if you see any like emergency signs, you just like got a concussion, keep an eye out, please. At that time, we didn't know of anything to do except just get through it. So I tried to just get through it. And looking back, I definitely had so many of like the same symptoms I have now. And that is also partially why we may think that this specific concussion, my most recent one, is also as severe as it is, because I had a previous concussion that was never properly treated. So after that first concussion, I was more sensitive to lights and sounds. I was more sensitive to being up late. I would definitely get like a migraine attack the next day. Movie theaters, I couldn't really tolerate them anymore after that concussion. So looking back, that one has definitely compiled into this one, along with just like the migraine disease and other like potentially underlying things that I may have. But yeah, that concussion was definitely treated much differently than this one. And in terms of severity, when they now label like concussion severity, they've taken out a little bit of like mild, moderate, severe, because someone can have a much worse like concussion, as in like hit or like a much more traumatic fall, but let's say their symptoms resolve within 3 months, and someone could have not as bad as a hit yet have symptoms for years. So in terms of like severity, it really just depends on the doctor's diagnosis and who you talk to.
Hi, so I know you said you had pet rats. Have you ever thought about getting a service animal?
Early on, like in the first 2 years, 3 years, I had like looked into it and I considered it, because I was like, wow, if I don't get better, and hypothetically if I had gotten worse, like if the dysautonomia I experienced, so that's made standing difficult. You know, I would, and I still do get lightheaded if I just like stand still. I can't do that. You know, my heart rate will raise and my blood pressure can drop. So in terms of that, in the beginning, I was definitely concerned and worried that like, oh gosh, like what if this gets worse? Because for people who have dysautonomia, or something specifically called like POTS, which is called like postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where your heart rate increases and people can pass out a lot from it. So I was concerned that like, oh gosh, do I need a service animal? Would it be helpful? Do I need a medical alert dog? But as I progressed through my recovery to now, I don't find that it would be something that I would be in need of, you know? But I definitely think it is a incredible resource, both service animals and ESAs, the emotional support animals, for all people, because they are a huge bridge to accessibility and livability.
Earlier you mentioned like being comfortable with being uncomfortable. How do you manage like going out of your comfort zone and like burning out or pushing yourself too hard?
Mm-hmm. It's a hard one to balance. I think I have to remind myself, I'm going to talk more in the present moment for right now. I think currently I have to remind myself that it's okay if I'm feeling really overwhelmed with things, because it can be. It's like, if I had to like tell myself in a day, being like, okay, make sure you take your medicine, make sure you pace, make sure you take your breaks and sit down and drink all the water you need to, and take your medication again, and do your gamma course 6 times, and your cephalene, you know what I mean? It's on top of like, okay, today I need to do like vision therapy, or maybe I need to do vestibular therapy. How am I going to balance it all? Am I going to feel up to it? Do I need to shower? It's like, you can see how like you can really overwhelm yourself with all the things that like you might need to do. So recently I've just had to learn when I am feeling that overwhelmed state, and I have to check in with myself and I have to be like, okay, why am I feeling this way? Is there something specific that I'm feeling this way? I will talk it out. You know, that's my boyfriend right there, so sometimes I will call him. And sometimes I'll call him and I'll talk it out and just like let him know what I'm feeling overwhelmed about, and then I'll feel a little better. Other times I might need to sit, or I might need to move my body, or I might need to write it out, or I might need to like slow down. You know, say Marshall and I like did something on the weekend and we want to do something on a Monday, or we want to go out to eat in midweek. And if I'm feeling overwhelmed by that, I have to also recognize that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to listen to your body and be like, you know what, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I feel like my symptoms have not come down. Like, I need to take it easy. I need to say no. And I really, really struggle with that, because I am someone who pushes myself. I want to do these things. I want to be involved. And coming from a distance athlete perspective, I was so used to pushing myself past that comfort zone. I was so used to pain that I was like, no pain, no gain. But now that's not the case, because too much pain and too much discomfort can then cycle into that feeling of like being unsafe. And then my brain now thinking, going into a restaurant is dangerous because every single time you've gone, you felt worse. You know, so it's really learning how to find that fine line of it's okay to push and it's okay to feel flaring symptoms as long as you give yourself that support that you need afterwards, during it, and before, because you want it to be sustainable.
Hi. So, what your speech and your poetry, all of it was absolutely beautiful. You talked a lot about writing. So I was wondering, have you ever thought about publishing a book or something like that?
I would love to publish a book. I definitely thought about that earlier on when I was just writing in my head before I even started writing things down. I was like, it would be really cool to document my journey in that way. So in the future, I definitely plan on compiling just my experiences and what I've learned. And again, it can be hard to find when's the right time. You know, you ask yourself that for a lot of things, but the answer to that is always there's never going to be a right time. There's never going to be a time where you're like, okay, now I'm going to do it. So in terms of getting that process started, I feel like I'm in very much of a transition period right now. I mean, I went from housebound, not leaving my house, knocked it out because I physically couldn't. And then the last 2 years, I've definitely been able to experience life more. And it's been a complete shock to my system. I'm like, socializing, that's different. That's weird. You know, I'm not used to this. I don't feel good. So as I'm in this transition period, I'm kind of learning how to live again. And I'm learning what life is and what that looks like and what that means. So when I write the book, I think I'd like to include some more of those life experiences, and I think in the next few years, that's where I'm going to be experiencing that bulk of life experiencing and mindset changes and perspective changes of looking back on what I have experienced. So definitely in the next 10 years, I'd like to write a book. And I think we're just going to take a few more questions, so if anyone else.
Okay, so I can only imagine how hard this journey has been for you, and I can only help but wonder, what do you say is your biggest inspiration that has gotten you from when you're beginning to now?
That inspiration changes, but a lot of the times I find that motivation inward from allowing myself to just feel and experience and dream. So dreaming can sometimes be scary because if it's something that's completely different than what you're doing now, it can feel very unattainable. But in the state I was in the beginning, it was everything was attainable. So might as well just create this world in my life that I'd like to live. And I think in the beginning that helped give me a lot of inspiration. And to fuel that, I would watch videos, or when I got to listen to audiobooks on things that interested me, whether it was in the medical field and science things, or travel videos of backpacking or bike packing and adventures like that. So I found a lot of inspiration towards that, and also just realizing that the presence in the moment is where inspiration can come from, and recognizing that your life is in your hands. While there are a lot of uncertainties and things that you can't control, if you have a dream and you have these desires to do something, let yourself feel it and then run with it. You know, don't push those feelings away, and don't be too afraid to start, because if you're too afraid to start, then you're not going to start. You know, if you're too afraid of the fear of starting, you might not get to where you want to be. But there's no shame in being afraid of doing anything. So if you really have a desire and passion and you feel this inspiration within you to try something new, to change your life up, there's no hurt in trying that. And now inspiration comes from living, you know, being that I am able to go out more, whether it's into a restaurant or some music stuff, and watch my boyfriend play music. The fact that I'm able to do these things, these emotions are going to come. The fact of every time in Ryla, there's a point where the emotions come. The fact that I'm able to like experience life in any way at all outside of my room is like such a mind-blowing thing to me, because for so many years I couldn't do anything. You know, I was not physically able to do anything. So life itself is like a huge inspiration for me, because like I can go outside and I can be like, wow, just like look how beautiful these trees are. Have a conversation with a friend and be able to like hear them and understand and be able to like speak back. And it's like, wow, connection is such a beautiful thing. Or just when you're in public, I mean, like right here, this 5-day camp that you guys are all at, it's like every moment you have an opportunity to connect, you have an opportunity to feel, you have an opportunity to experience, and those 3 things right there, I mean, that is life. That is what life is about. And reminding yourself that that's what's precious, and that's where the magic is. This magic isn't in these huge things that happen, these huge vacations, these huge goals that you achieve. That's not where the inspiration comes from. The inspiration is literally in living. So realizing that is just like huge, you know?